I'll be upfront. I'm probably not the person you expect to be hosting a conversation about BTS. I'm not ARMY. I haven't followed every album drop, every live stream. I can't make out each of them in a photo without some, visual prompts. So I can't tell you what they mean to fans in a personal way. But that's exactly, I think, why I am drawn to this conversation. Because from the outside, this isn't just a comeback. To me, it feels bigger than that. And here's what some fans around the world who descended into Seoul at their comeback gig said.
At least for me, if I felt lonely, without them because, we cannot see them, I would either listen to their songs or watch their shows. And it's like they've lived already so much stuff to ARMY that it's like, even though they were gone for so long, at least for me, I never felt lonely because, they just left so many things and, now they're coming together and, it's just insane.
BTS has been a great help for me. They've been an inspiration. They've been happiness for me. They brought me a lot of people, a lot of ARMY, good friends. So, I've been waiting for them. And when they announced the comeback, I said that I have to be there. I just want to experience being in Korea during their comeback.
So the question for me isn't, are they still big? We know. Yes, they are. For me is, what are they now? The Arirang World Tour kicks off April 9th, 82 shows in 34 cities, all sold out. Now, they're returning to a different world. K-pop has evolved, new groups have risen, and each BTS member has grown in their own direction. So today I want to understand what this return really means. Is this the continuation of the same story? Can it be the same story? Or the start of something new? I'm Genevieve Woo, and to help me unpack all of this, I've got two special guests with very different vantage points. Grace Shin, producer and presenter, and our senior correspondent, Lim Yoon-suk in Seoul. Grace, let's start with you. You covered ARMY up close when you were a cub reporter in Korea. Tell us a little bit more, what was that like in the early years?
Right. So I was actually a BTS journalist per se, and that was one of my first gigs as a journalist, and that was around 2019 and 20. And this was around the time when they released Map of the Soul with their lead track Boy With Love featuring Halsey. And it was the phase where BTS wasn't just big, they were breaking into spaces K-pop really didn't ever enter before. And what I'm talking about is a K-pop act for the first time selling out Wembley Stadium, performing on Saturday Night Live, and getting all those Billboard number ones. So it was the first ever for a K-pop group to show how fandom expands outside of South Korea and is very global. I think this was a turning point for BTS to put K-pop and K-culture on the grid globally. Band went to the restaurants the septet would visit during their training years, and at every stop, I'd meet fans who had flown in from all over the world, whether it be Southeast Asia, the United States, or Europe, just to see where BTS has been. So everyone would build entire trips around BTS. Everyone would have their own story, and for me to be covering that was just a phenomenal experience.
Yoon-suk, what about you? You covered them in those early years too, didn't you?
Well, yes, I did. Before all, when all the members were going to the military, we did a story about what this would be for ARMY fans. And that was the time when I really felt that ARMY was something special, because I remember visiting this one cafe near Hype, the agency office, and this was run by a woman in her 50s. And she was this huge BTS fan, but so was her daughter, who was in her 20s. And when you go there, that whole place is packed with fans. And, the interesting thing was these fans were people in their teens, people in their 50s and 60s. And also, I went to this one art exhibition where fans had drawn, portraits of the BTS members. And I remember meeting these two women from Japan, and they were in their 60s and 70s. And so, it really did struck me then that this is not your usual K-pop band. And, these fans are from their teens, their 60s, 70s. And so I just got a feeling then that this wasn't really just a BTS music, but that BTS was sending them a message. And they all said the same thing to me, that, BTS was saying it's okay to struggle, you're not alone. And so, that sort of like that message came up over and over again, saying that BTS really helped them through these difficult times. And so I think that's why you have this army, together, and they click in a way as a community.
And that message is very universal, isn't it? When they talk about personal struggle, personal anxieties, it cuts across all ages, so it's generational. It also cuts across, I suppose, audiences. It's not just in Korean, it's also in English. Everybody can identify with that kind of message. I read that there's something between 90 million to more than 136 million fans worldwide. And that's probably part of their allure, that message that cuts across generation and even transcends language, doesn't it? So during the break, the hiatus, did you find anything that's changed about ARMY? Is the fandom still the same energy as we remember them?
I don't think Army ever lost its energy per se, but maybe it has evolved because, as you mentioned, BTS inevitably had to take a break, starting with the oldest member, Shin, getting enlisted in December of 2022. And leading up to that, there was debate not only amongst fans, but also in South Korea as to whether BTS should be exempt from military service, given that they clearly contributed to South Korea's global image, they generated billions for the economy. But nonetheless, once the decision was made and BTS confirmed that they would enlist, the reaction was actually quite measured because fans had already come to terms with it. And I think it was very strategic and efficient for Hype to decide to, Big Hit Entertainment to decide at the time to enlist one member at sequentially. So once one would go in, the others would either perform, they would have their own solos, or they would still interact with fans so that fans wouldn't have to miss out too much just because the whole band would eventually have to go inside to the military service.
I think the fact that, whether to exempt them from military service, that even came up as a political discussion on the debate, I think that's really fascinating, isn't it? I mean, that is so much that, there was even talk to change a national policy, and also that BTS contributes some $5 billion annually to Korean GDP. That's 0.3%, and that's comparable to all of Korean Air's 0.7 GDP contribution and $11 billion. When the group reaches that level, are they still a pop act? Is it part of now economic infrastructure?
They are huge. That's definitely something that we can't ignore. But, I wouldn't go far as calling them an infrastructure, in the traditional sense, like how we would for energy or transport. But clearly, I think they're not just a Korean K-pop act anymore. I mean, they do function as this form of soft power, a cultural export for South Korea. And that really has its economic consequences. And you can really see it in the tourism. I mean, in the global consumer demand and how South Korea is really being perceived internationally too, outside of Korea. And, it's that kind of impact. And it's not just confined to music, but it is spilling over to other sectors too, like the retail, the financial markets through their agency Hype. And so I think definitely you are looking at something that behaves much more than just this traditional artist, a K-pop band. We might be able to call it an infrastructure in some way now, but it's not fixed. It's not guaranteed. But then, having said that too, if you look at Korean drama and K-pop till now, you can see that, Korean cultural acts have really never ever reached this kind of level too. And so, yes, they did start off as a K-pop group, but at this level, what we're seeing now is that they're functioning like an industry. And that's why, the return of the BTS really matters to the South Koreans, not just to the fans, but to the South Korean economy at least.
Right. Now, BTS success from the start was very organic when they first launched. Almost 10 years on, what about now? Is their dominance something that's leveraged by larger forces?
I think their early growth was definitely organic because before they became this global name, I remember watching videos their agency would upload on YouTube with members joking around with one another and still constantly interacting with fans. And at the time, that wasn't the most traditional or conventional way that K-pop artists would reach out to fans. And a lot of analysts point to that being a part of the underdog factor, whether intentional or not. That's how they were perceived because at the time, the dominant agencies were SM, JYP, and YG, not Big Hit. And because BTS came from a smaller company, you would have, and these 7 members, they wouldn't they weren't just from the capital Seoul. They came from very different parts of South Korea, including the more rural regions like Busan. And they also took a less conventional route. As I mentioned, they leaned on social media to build a direct relationship with fans. And you can see that approach being scaled throughout their career as HYBE essentially institutionalized that kind of interaction by building the platform Weverse.
I think BTS built this global following through the social media in the beginning, and they had this fan engagement, which a lot of the others didn't have. But then I think very importantly was also that they didn't have any state backing. But, at this scale now, the influence is, the government is using them as a leverage, and also HYBE is also using them. And at times, the South Korean government uses them a lot, in fact, and so they're not propaganda, but they have now become very central to South Korea's project of how they want to perceive themselves outside of South Korea. So, yes, they didn't start off as some people may call it a strategic asset in a way, but now I think for South Korea, BTS has become a strategic asset in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the South Korean government appointed BTS as special presidential envoy for future generations and culture. This was 2021. BTS spoke at the United Nations General Assembly several times. That clearly went a long way to projecting South Korea's presence and, I suppose, like you said, soft power. So, being like cultural ambassadors, speaking at the United Nations at that level, has BTS gone from being disruptive to now establishment?
For a K-pop act to be speaking at such a global stage, like at the UN, I think that proves a lot. And not to mention just their record alone currently right now with Arirang, they're sweeping Billboard charts. But you have to realize that during that 2019-2020 period when they really became this global act and they swept Billboard charts, at the time, it wasn't common for a K-pop group to do that. But then ever since that success story, I think it became quite tradition now to see a lot of K-pop stars follow their tracks. And so I think it's definitely saying that, yeah, it's disruptive. They've basically put K-pop onto the global grid.
They are disruptive. They're also establishment. That seems to be a bit of, there's tension there, right? So what exactly are they disrupting now? Are they a standard that newer bands push back against to differentiate? Are they setting that kind of standards now, the establishment, the younger ones push back?
They are the establishment now here in Korea. But, if you think about it, the members were in their late teens. They were about 15 to 20 years old when they first started off. But now, so when they started off, as we heard from Grace, they started off as the outsiders, smaller agency, and they were directly connecting with the fans now. But over time and now, this success that they have right now has really changed their position. And I think, for BTS today, most of them are now, in their 30s. But now they're the global headlines. They're tied to the major companies here in South Korea, and HYBE, closely associated with the national branding and institutions here in South Korea too. So though they are part of this establishment, what's also interesting, I think, is that culturally, they still retain that elements of what they started off with, especially this connection that they have with the fans, right? And, talking to the army, the fans, and whether they're in their 70s or the 20s, they really talk about this connection that they have.
Now, who benefits most from the BTS comeback?
Well, obviously fans. Fans benefit from BTS's comeback because it's the first time they can see members all together. And I think this time around, it's even more emotional because the hype surrounding their comeback also included, because even for us, if you're not a big fan of BTS, you still wonder whether they can meet up to the hype that has been built. They didn't have a comeback in nearly 4 years, but can they meet up to the level of anticipation and success that they've showed before? And many fans that I've spoken to were very nervous about that. But once they had their relatively successful comeback concert, which was free and also hosted in the Smack Center of Seoul at a very traditionally, but also in modern days, symbolic place at Gwanghwamun Square, I think fans were very happy to see that they matched up to the names of kings of K-pop. When I saw the convenience stores colored in purple, or nearby areas in Gwanghwamun Square just light up with ARMY's symbolic color purple, or write BTS welcome, I could see that, okay, this is a national event, really equivalent and matching up to the energy that BTS will bring. Because everyone knows that there's a word called BTSnomics. They're an economic indicator because they generate a lot of money for the South Korean economy, and that ripples into effects for like retailers or people who may not be fans but can still benefit from them. So I do think BTS's comeback is bringing a lot of positive energy and effects for not just fans but also regular South Koreans.
I found that the comeback strategy was, like you said, it leveraged very much on tradition and symbolism. And I thought that was very clever because they also named the album Arirang. And that is very meaningful to Koreans too, isn't it? Why did they leverage on this symbolism?
Yes, I think so, because Arirang is a traditional song that's known by children, and grandmothers and grandfathers and people in the past, and even North Koreans know that song. It's popular in North Korea too. And so I think for them to come back with that song, I think in a way it's them. Yes, they are the BTS, and we think of BTS being a K-pop, something that's very modern and up there. But then they're going back to the roots where they came from, and that's South Korea, and that goes back to Arirang. Don't know exactly why. I mean, they all discussed it among themselves apparently, and they all decided that Arirang would be the perfect way to return, to come back to the scene. But speaking to many Koreans out here and experts too, they think the fact that they took that word Arirang, it really symbolizes the Korean society in South Korea too, and so that in a way could help them.
We say what goes up must come down. So for BTS with such a global dominance, at this point, what would failure look like for BTS?
I don't think BTS could ever fail per se because they've achieved so much. Especially, they've broken the system for K-pop. They created their own system, and a lot of their hubes, or their junior colleagues, have followed track to what they've achieved so far. But I do think, so instead of using the word failure for me, I would like to say what I'm concerned about when it comes to their career succeeding is the mental health issues that they constantly bring up. Because BTS has a very rich history in interacting with fans, being very open about what they go through mentally. And I think that's what resonates with global fans, because in South Korea, that's traditionally quite close in the sense of openly talking about mental health. For an influential figure like BTS to be talking on platforms about their mental health journey is influential enough. But also it raises awareness to the fact that this area in the K-pop industry or entertainment industry in general needs more attention and investment. So I do think that one cautionary measure that the South Korean, I guess the whole K-pop industry or entertainment industry must consider is how can we allow our artists to sustain what they're doing without ever feeling the need to escape or give up.
Numbers don't, really show any of that. But if you look at the album sales and everything, yeah, they will continue to go up. They have that army backing behind them. But I think there's a different kind of fatigue. I just read this recently in BTS, The Return. Some of the members have started to talk about saying that they feel like they were committing a crime if they asked if they could take a break. And, one of them compares the system that they have now to a factory, that constant pressure to be able to go out there and produce and stay relevant, to keep up with the industry that is moving very, very fast. And so, if anything, I think, is the audience going to get tired of them, but it's really going to be they're just going to be so burnt out that they can't do what they've been doing, because it is something that a lot of K-pop dramas, actors, K-pop singers, and all of them go through this burnout, and where the Korean government, because they make so much use of them, in the end, they have to take care of them too.
Yeah, you're right. Well, on that note, we wish BTS well. Not that they need more luck from us. I mean, they are young boys. They're resilient. They have many years ahead of them. Very quickly, I'm not going to make you sing, even though I threatened to earlier. Name me your favorite song and your favorite member.
I'll start because I don't know many. The only thing that I know, and I remember doing a story, was about Dynamite. I know their song Dynamite. I can dance to it. I can't sing it, but I know when it's out there. And Jungkook, I guess, I don't know, he's out there, but I just find him cute.
All right, Grace, all yours.
I was so worried that we might have to sing.
I could still make you do it.
Okay, no, I'm gonna answer quick. My favorite song is Microcosmos. It's about the lyrics really hit me different because it's basically saying, and I think that's the whole message the band tries to bring to the world. And I think that's why, despite it being sung in Korean, a lot of fans who don't even know Korean can relate to it. And it's talking about there's so many stars in the universe, and if you look afar, it looks like a beautiful galaxy. And you might feel like you're just a speck of dust, or you're just like one little element that's not really filling in the whole picture. But if you look closer, you're one very beautiful speck that's filling up that whole galaxy. And I think that message really resonated with me because the band is always telling fans, or even non-fans, just through their music, that you are special in your own way. So I personally received a lot of love and comfort while listening to this song. And favorite member is very difficult because I think a lot of K-pop fans might relate. I mean, I like all of them.
All right. That's a safe answer. No, you have to choose one.
If I had to choose one, I personally really like Shin, the oldest member. Because he comes out in a lot of reality shows, a lot of comedy shows and reality programs these days. And personally, I'm just catching up. So it's always interesting to see him. Yeah.
All right.
I think you can tell that she's the Army, that she's the BTS fan actor.
Yeah. You are Army, even though you're not admitting it, Grace. For me, very quickly, Dynamite. Of course, like I said, it's it's so relatable. It's out there. It just gets you dancing. And because I had to do so much research for this podcast, my next favorite song would actually be Swim, the latest single from Arirang, because it just became such an earworm because I had to listen to it so much. But it caught on, and I guess my favorite member would be RM. It's something about his eyes. That's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. And on that high note, a warm thanks to Grace Shin and Lim Yoon Suk. You've both been dynamite.
Thank you.
So we started with a simple question. What does BTS comeback actually mean? BTS today sits at the intersection of economics, national strategy, and music taste, raising the question of whether their rise is still organic or something more tightly managed. So when they return, it's not just about new music, it's the reactivation of an entire ecosystem. The bigger they become, the harder it is to see them purely as what they started as, artists telling personal stories. So maybe the real question is, are we looking at a band or something much larger? Thanks for joining me on this episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast. It's brought to you by Tiffany Ang, Annette Vero, Craig Dale, Zikri Ayman, and me, Genevieve Woo. Bye for now.